Ilya Samsonov in the goaltending situation. How do you see it playing out? And what do you think that market looks like for a Samsonov?
Well, I mean, specific to Toronto, I think that, he's got value, obviously. He made the best of his opportunity this past season, and I'm confident that something is going to get done with the Maple Leafs. I listened to you guys talk about the number, and that doesn't sound outlandish to me. It might to Brad Treliving and the Maple Leafs when, they're wrestling with the cap. I got to believe it's going to be in the fours on an annual average salary, but then what does the term look like? And I don't think that the term can be overly daunting from Toronto's perspective as well. I think that the term is perhaps going to surprise some people when we go beyond Samsonov and look at Austin Matthews and what he might command in terms of the number of years. Yeah, from a club or a fan perspective, you'd love to lock him down for 8 years. That's not likely. In fact, that's highly unlikely. You're probably talking about a 3, 4, 5-year term for Austin Matthews, and then he'll hit the mother load again. So I think that it's workable with Samsonov to come back to the goaltending. I know that he is a priority among the list of priorities that Brad Treliving is going to have to wrestle with. But if you're Ilya Samsonov, you're probably also looking, if that number is accurate, which we talked about, somewhere in the fours, then you're probably looking at a shorter term anyway, so that you can maximize. If he can prove on a real big stage in a market like Toronto that he is a legit number one, then after a couple, 3 years, chances are that number grows considerably.
And if he earns it, great. And why tie yourself into something that's not completely proven for whatever 6 years long, and then you're stuck with them, right? I've seen that happen too many times.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And what we've learned from those Stanley Cup champions of late is that you better be careful when you're handing out contracts to your goaltenders, right? Especially in Vegas, where they went through 5 of them this year, and who had Aiden Hill on their bingo card as being, in the Conn Smythe conversation in the Stanley Cup final? Absolutely nobody. And Aiden Hill is going to get paid because of the performance in the playoffs. But I think what clubs have realized is unless you're absolutely certain that you've got an elite level goaltender to commit in the $8, the $9, the $10 million range, that's risky business. It is. And just to throw another name at you guys, I mean, that's why we talk so much about Connor Hellebuyck on insider trading. It's believed he's looking for an Andrei Vasilevsky type of contract at $9.5 million. And he also wants to win. Well, how many contending teams out there can afford to pay, a goaltender $9.5 million? Now, Hellebuyck is under contract next year at 6.2. But if you're tying your wagon to any goaltender for 7, 8 years at 9.5, you'd better be absolutely sure that he's going to be able to carry the mail for at least half of that contract, if not more. So I think general managers and organizations generally are very careful when it comes to committing long-term and big money to their goalies.
And while we're on the topic of Toronto's goalies, what do you see going on with Matt Murray, and how do they unload that contract? Is it a simple move, or is it going to take some finagling?
Yeah, Rosie, it's going to be a challenge. It is. And I don't see how Toronto gets out from under that contract unless there's an ailment that isn't going to recover anytime soon. So then you're talking about long-term injury as perhaps a get out of jail card. You're looking at salary retention. I mean, I don't think Toronto is going to want to throw in a sweetener to the degree that they would have to get a team to bite on Matt Murray. But you might be able to include something that you can live with and then retain as much as 50% of that salary to make that deal work. And it feels like they've got to get creative and do something like that, because when we look at goaltending, I think we all see Samsonov and Joseph Woll. That's what we see as the 1-2 punch in Toronto. And, whether Matt Murray has another restart in him or not, I guess that's up to Matt Murray and where his health is, but it just doesn't seem like he works in Toronto any longer.
Dregs, there's so many moving parts to this whole situation, and I don't envy the job ahead for Brad Treliving. The guy's been very, very busy, as you know. But Ryan O'Reilly, the name poked up again on insider trading yesterday. Yeah. What kind of deal is the O'Reilly camp looking for or seeking here in free agency? Do you know?
Yeah, you know what, Nick? I think it depends, though, on the fit and the opportunity. And, you know, you have to be creative when you're a player at the point in his career where Ryan O'Reilly is. You know, Chris Johnson and I were having a conversation earlier today, and he reminded me of the fact that, you know, O'Reilly jumped into the National Hockey League as an 18-year-old. So he's got a ton of mileage on that body. Not to say that he's not a fierce competitor or can still be a key contributor, because he can be. And it is the intangibles that also attract you to why you'd want to keep Ryan O'Reilly in the fold. Is there a team out there that's willing to go as high as, say, 4 years in term? And then what does that AAV look like? Well, if it creeps to 4 years, then it's probably going to be less than $5 million or around $5 million. I doubt that the Toronto Maple Leafs have the stomach to go 4 years. Maybe they do, though, if that annual average salary, as I've suggested, comes down even a little bit more, because Ryan O'Reilly, you know, chooses Toronto and wants to stay in the organization and for family reasons in the community. Now, that being said, you know, I got to put my general manager's hat on here for just a moment. With all due respect to Ryan O'Reilly, it's not a real deep crop of unrestricted free agents. Different player, I understand this. But what if Ivan Barbashev pops into the market and you can get Barbashev at around $4.5 million, $4.5 to $5 million for sake of argument? You know, that's, I think, what the Maple Leafs have to be wrestling with. And any team that's looking at Ryan O'Reilly is, what are the comps out there? Not specific to the position or the player, but just how you're investing your money.
For sure. While we're talking about trade deadline pickups, Dregs, another one was Luke Schenn. You know, he's not a big money guy, but he seemed to have a big impact, and yet they don't have a deal done. And from what I've heard, they don't seem to be too close. That's not from Luke. That's just from the rumor mill. But are they going to get this guy done? It seems like from what he brought to the table, he'd be essential to getting them locked up again.
Well, I think they'd like to, no doubt about that. But typical of the Toronto Maple Leafs or any cap team, it's hard to look at your pending unrestricted free agents and know where you're at, because you've got some other bigger fish that are in the pool here. You know, I think priority one is dealing specifically with William Nylander on July 1st and knowing where you're at. You know, the appetite is to get something done with him. Is it plausible? You know, they need to find that out, and find that out ASAP. So if they do that, then they're embracing their core four. And maybe, I guess, you wrestle with the notion of changing that core four if things don't work out to start the year. But I think that has to be the priority. And then the other pieces of the puzzle, you know, kind of fit into place after that. I agree with you on the assessment of Luke Schenn. I really do. And then I look at Justin Hall, who's a free agent, and man, that guy's just become a whipping boy, right? In Toronto, it feels like for the better of his career, he should probably go elsewhere. And I saw the graphic that you guys put up in the list of free agents. And there's speculation around TJ Brody this week, which was a head scratcher for me. I mean, look, TJ Brody didn't have the best postseason of his life. We can all understand that. We all know how difficult that position is to play. But to target him as a buyout option didn't make a whole lot of sense to me with 1 year left. And the fact that, you know, if they were considering breaking away from TJ Brody, there'd be a trade partner for him, again, given his contract status. So I think because they know that Luke is willing to be patient, because they know that he enjoyed his second time around with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that he's likely going to be there. He's going to have to be patient. I'm not convinced he's going to be there. I'm not convinced that they're not going to have to make a tough decision, because how good a fit he was, I don't know if it was a surprise to you. It was a surprise to me that he got slotted. And when he left Vancouver, the message that I got from people there that I trust was that he couldn't be an every game player. He couldn't be. And then he turned out to be a necessity every game for how he played. So we'll see how it plays out. But I know that there's an appetite. It's just the unfortunate reality of where they're at in the cap world.
So, Dregs, the big thing I've been wrestling with on this show the last couple of weeks, everybody wants, you know, a drastic change, a big change, but I think we all have come to the realization it's not going to be with the core four. So my question to you is, like, if you want to make a potential trade, what does this team have in terms of assets to make a trade? If it's not going to be a Robertson, if it's not going to be a Nyes, what can they deal to get something significant here?
Gets pretty lean after that, though, doesn't it? And you know, because of what you just said, to get something back that's significant. You know, I'd even look at the core four, and I had this conversation on Overdrive earlier this week with those guys because, look, I mean, Brian Hayes, we know, you know, like you said, Nick, he's one of many who thinks that there's got to be some form of significant change, and to date there hasn't been, including, you know, Brad Treliving clearly siding with Sheldon Keefe and wanting to give him more opportunity and the expectation that there would be a contract extension with Sheldon Keefe. But if you're throwing out a name like Marner or Nylander, go down the list, you know, guys inside that core four, what are you getting back that you're absolutely certain is going to make you that much better? Or there's no guarantee. I mean, how many of us thought the Boston Bruins were going to get dispatched by the Florida Panthers in round one? Nobody. I mean, come on, you know, but that's why the playoffs matter. And that's why there are never any guarantees. So I think that the core four is at the end of the runway. I really, truly do. And there will be many who say, no, that they're past the end. I'm not there yet. And I side with Shanahan and I side with Brad Treliving in recognizing the skill set of these players. Now, if the maturity moves up another notch, if the intestinal fortitude and realizing the type of game that you have to play, like the Florida Panthers played to get to even game 5 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, is how you need to invest to win. If that group can get to that point, I think they can win with these guys. I can. And if they can't, then guess what? When you have me on next June, there will be significant change, and it'll come in varying forms, not just the roster.
I'd have to agree, Dregs. I feel like everyone just wants a trigger pull. They don't want to run it back and to go through the same thing they've gone through for a couple of years. But it's just not that easy as saying we're going to make a change. You can't do something for the sake of doing it. It has to make your team better. And in this world, it's just not always possible. But maybe they need a sports psychologist in there or something to start getting those guys on the rails because, geez, they just fall short in the playoffs every year, don't they?
A sports psychologist, Rosie? I think they've probably got about 10 of them on staff, and I could be light in that regard. You know that. I mean, the resources of the Toronto Maple Leafs are in abundance, but you know what? Let's look. I mean, when Treliving and Austin Matthews met recently, primarily that meeting was, you know, for the Matthews camp especially, to listen to the vision of Brad Treliving and what changes he wants to make. I doubt very much that he's lobbing out specific, excuse me, names, but he'd be talking about elements that he wants to either bring in or bring back that are going to give this team another chance. And I think that that's what Matthews was looking for in that conversation. I can't imagine that anything in that conversation would have had Austin Matthews leaning towards, okay, I don't like what I'm hearing from this new GM. So I'm just going to keep my powder dry. July 1st is nothing but a calendar day to me. You know, they want to come back to me in season, fine. I'm willing to roll the dice. So I think collectively speaking, this team in a way is going to look different. We don't know how exactly because we have to allow Brad Treliving to do his work. I was gobsmacked at what Matthew Knies was able to bring to the equation. I don't know about you guys. I didn't think that a college player would be able to step in and play the way he played. You did?
Love this kid. He's so bloody, he's so mature, so confident. Watched his highlight package. Talking to him, I'm like, this kid is ready now. But obviously it's tougher to do.
And I'm admitting, look, I thought he was going to be a good player. I just didn't think he'd have that poise and that swagger, the way he hunted down pucks, how he protected pucks, and all of those things. So how about having a healthy Matthew Knies involved from day one of training camp? I mean, this kid is going to be comfortably in their top 6, and he might feel like a significant add or a significant trade piece. I know that's saying a lot and putting a lot on a young man's shoulders who's got limited NHL experience, but he seems to have that pop. So that could be one of a number of things that makes this club better.
And of course, we love Kniesy here on Leafs Morning Take. Last one, we'll let you go. The next 2 weeks, in your prediction, what do they look like for the Toronto Maple Leafs leading up to July 1 and July 1 for that matter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be busy. It has to be busy, right? But again, we're revisiting here and saying, you know, busy in the sense that there's going to be significant moves. Probably not. Not to say that it's impossible. What does the free agent market look like? It's interesting. Look, I mean, Toronto is going to have to add some pieces to make them better. How creative are they going to be able to be? The blue line's going to need attention just through attrition. There's going to be changes there, right? We talked about that earlier in the segment. So I'm more interested in some of what we've already seen. Ray Ferraro and I had this conversation on the podcast, which we recorded earlier. Will get posted. How do we view Oliver Ekman-Larsson, you know, across the NHL? And why can't we connect him to the Toronto Maple Leafs? I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, every other team is going to consider this guy as an option. If he's a third line pairing and you're paying him $1.5 million or $2 million, you know, could that be the type of creativity that Brad Treliving and the Maple Leafs consider? I look at other teams here, fellas. I don't know the Tampa Bay Lightning have any interest in doing business with a playoff rival like the Maple Leafs. I think Ross Colton is going to be too expensive to the Tampa Bay Lightning moving forward. Wouldn't you like to see that kind of game, you know, if you're a Maple Leafs fan? But again, Toronto and probably 15 other teams would look at Ross Colton when or if he hits the trade block.
And as someone who loves movement, Dregs, I just love the fact that Brad Treliving is attached to everything. You know him from his days in Arizona and Calgary. It's great, eh?
I mean, it is, but he drives people crazy in that sense too. Not me, because look, I'm in the insider business. So, you know, that kind of fodder is what we live for. But, you know, he gets involved in every single trade conversation. But that's doing your due diligence, right? If there's a way to get creative and make it work, then he wants to be part of that dialogue.